Every man who has ever wanted to genuinely satisfy his partner was working from an incomplete manual. Not because he wasn't trying, not because the desire wasn't there, but because the single most important chapter, the one grounded in actual female anatomy, actual neuroscience, and actual clinical research, was never written for him. Nobody handed it to him. Nobody sat him down and walked him through it. Society handed him a narrative, one built around performance, around penetration, around a version of sex that serves male anatomy almost exclusively, and told him that if he followed it, she would be satisfied. She was not. She is not. And the data on this is not subtle. Today I am writing that chapter, not the version built on assumption and cultural myth, the version built on peer-reviewed research, landmark anatomical discoveries, and decades of clinical work with real women in real relationships. By the end of this video, you will understand more about how to truly satisfy your partner than most men learn in a lifetime. Let's begin. Welcome back to the channel. If you are here for the first time, my name is Dr. Julia Rodes. I am a certified men's sex therapist with over a decade of clinical experience working with men and couples across all stages of life. A significant portion of my clinical work focuses on exactly what we are discussing today: the gap between what men think satisfies their partners and what actually does. The gap between cultural narrative and clinical reality. The gap between effort and outcome in the intimate lives of couples who genuinely love each other but have never been given the right information. I want to be clear about what this video is and what it is not. It is not a list of tricks. It is not a performance guide. It is not designed to turn you into a technically proficient machine in the bedroom while leaving the human relationship untouched. It is a clinically grounded, research-backed, deeply honest conversation about female anatomy, female arousal, and the specific knowledge that empowers men to be genuinely present, genuinely attentive, and genuinely effective partners to the women they love. This is the conversation most men have never had until today. Before we go any further, one thing. If you are a man who wants to genuinely understand his partner, not just physically, but in every dimension of what makes her feel desired, satisfied, and deeply connected, this channel was built for you. Every week, I bring you honest, research-backed, clinically grounded content specifically designed for men who take their intimate relationships seriously. Men who want more than platitudes and performance advice. Men who want real knowledge. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications because what I'm sharing today is some of the most practically important content on this entire channel. Subscribe. Let's get into the research. The orgasm gap. What the data actually shows. Let me start with a number that I want you to sit with for a moment. Research published in the Archives of Sexual Behavior, drawing on data from over 52,000 adults, found that heterosexual women reported orgasming during sex approximately 65% of the time. Heterosexual men reported 95%. That is a 30 percentage point gap. And I want to be precise about what this gap means and what it does not mean. It does not mean that men are inherently more capable of orgasm. It does not mean that women's bodies are less responsive. It does not reflect a difference in desire or in the capacity for pleasure. It reflects a difference in technique. Specifically, and this is what the researchers concluded, the systematic overestimation of penetration as a route to female orgasm and the systematic underestimation of clitoral stimulation as the primary driver of it. This gap has been replicated across multiple studies, multiple cultural contexts, and multiple age groups. It is not a quirk of one dataset. It is one of the most consistently documented findings in the scientific literature on human sexuality. And here's the implication that I want every man watching this to absorb fully. If your partner is not orgasming reliably during your intimate encounters, the overwhelmingly likely explanation is not that something is wrong with her. The overwhelmingly likely explanation is that the approach being used is not aligned with how her body actually works. That is not a criticism, it is a gap in information. And gaps in information can be closed. That is exactly what today's video does. The clitoral truth. What anatomy has been hiding? I need to talk to you about anatomy, specifically about a piece of female anatomy that was absent from medical textbooks for most of the 20th century, and whose absence has had profound consequences for the intimate lives of couples everywhere: the clitoris. Most men have a mental image of the clitoris as a small external structure, a button of heightened sensitivity visible at the top of the vulva. And they are not wrong about that external portion, but they are profoundly incomplete in their understanding of the full structure. In 1998, Australian urologist Dr. Helen O'Connell published landmark anatomical research that mapped the complete internal structure of the clitoris for the first time. What she found, and what subsequent work by Dr. Odile Buisson and Dr. Pierre Fulz confirmed and expanded, fundamentally changed the anatomical picture. The clitoris is not a small external button. It is an extensive internal structure averaging approximately 10 centimeters in total length. It has two internal legs, the cura, that extend backward on either side of the vaginal opening. It has vestibular bulbs, masses of erectile tissue that surround the vaginal canal on both sides, and the visible external portion, the glans clitoris, is merely the tip of this much larger structure. When a woman becomes aroused, the entire clitoral complex becomes engorged with blood. Not just the external tip, but the internal legs and bulbs as well. This internal engagement is why the position, angle, and type of stimulation during penetrative sex can make such a significant difference to her experience. The internal portions of the clitoral complex surround the vaginal canal. Pressure on the anterior vaginal wall, particularly at the correct angle and depth, can stimulate the internal clitoral structures through the vaginal wall. This is the anatomical explanation for what women sometimes describe as internal sensation during penetration. It is the clitoral complex being stimulated internally. But here is the critical clinical implication of this anatomy. For most women, the internal stimulation achievable through penetration alone is insufficient to produce orgasm, because the primary concentration of nerve endings is at the external glans clitoris, which penetration does not reliably contact. The anatomy simply does not align in a way that makes penetration the most efficient or most reliable route to clitoral stimulation for the majority of women. Understanding this is not a defeat, it is a liberation. It frees both partners from a model of sex that was never anatomically designed to work as advertised, and opens the door to an approach that is actually aligned with how her body functions. The penetration myth. What most men believe that is wrong. Let me be direct about something that most men have never heard stated plainly. Penetration is not the primary event of sex for most women. It is one element of a much larger picture, and treating it as the primary event, as the main course after which everything else is a side dish, is the single most common and most consequential technique error that men make. The data on this is unambiguous. Research by Dr. Elizabeth Lloyd, synthesizing findings across multiple studies, found that only approximately 18% of women reliably achieve orgasm through penetration alone. Approximately 36% report that clitoral stimulation is required alongside penetration, and a further significant percentage report that direct clitoral stimulation without penetration is their most reliable and satisfying route to orgasm. Only about 1 in 5 women consistently orgasm from penetration alone. For the remaining 4 out of 5, clitoral stimulation is either required in addition to penetration or is the primary mechanism entirely. These findings have been replicated consistently across cultural contexts and age groups. This is not a niche finding. It is the central finding of decades of research on female sexual response. And yet the cultural narrative, the one embedded in films, in popular culture, in the way sex is discussed and depicted almost everywhere, presents penetration as the culmination and the definition of sex. For approximately 18% of women, that narrative aligns with their anatomy. For the other 82%, it does not. The men who understand this and adapt their approach accordingly are the men whose partners experience genuine, consistent satisfaction, not because they are more talented or more experienced, because they are working with accurate information. The psychological prerequisites emotion as technique. Before I go any further into physical technique, I need to establish something that is more important than any specific physical approach I will share today. Psychological safety, emotional connection, and feeling genuinely desired are not additions to female arousal, they are prerequisites for it. This is not a metaphor, this is neuroscience. Dr. Rosemary Bassan's research on the nonlinear model of female sexual response established something that fundamentally distinguishes female arousal from the more linear model that most people have been taught to expect. For many women, desire does not precede arousal. It emerges from the right emotional and relational conditions being present. A woman who feels genuinely safe, genuinely desired, and genuinely connected to her partner is neurologically primed for arousal in a way that a woman who feels rushed, pressured, or emotionally disconnected is not. The mechanism is cortisol. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, directly suppresses the neurological and vascular processes that female arousal requires. When a woman is stressed, anxious, or emotionally guarded, her cortisol levels are elevated. And elevated cortisol creates a physiological environment in which genuine arousal is significantly impaired, regardless of how technically proficient her partner's physical approach might be. This means that emotional context is not a separate conversation from physical technique. It is part of the technique. In fact, it is the foundation on which every other technique in this video depends. What does this look like in practice? It means that the quality of the interaction before any physical intimacy begins matters enormously. The conversation, the touch, the eye contact, the genuine expression of desire, not performed desire, but authentic desire, the absence of pressure or agenda, the presence of warmth and full attention. When a woman feels that the person she is with is genuinely, completely present, focused on her rather than on an outcome, her nervous system shifts from guarded to receptive. Cortisol recedes. The neurological and vascular pathways of arousal open. And from that open receptive state, everything that follows lands differently, more deeply, more effectively, more satisfyingly. Emotional safety is not the warm-up to technique. It is the condition that makes technique work, the foreplay foundation. How to build genuine arousal? With the psychological foundation in place, let me talk about the physical foundation, and specifically about what adequate arousal actually requires before any genital stimulation begins. The term foreplay is itself part of the problem. It implies something preliminary, something that happens before the real thing, a prelude rather than a performance in its own right. For most women, foreplay is not preliminary. It is essential, and its duration and quality are among the strongest predictors of whether she will reach orgasm. Here is the physiological reality. Female arousal involves a process of engorgement, blood flowing into the clitoral complex, the vaginal walls, and the vestibular bulbs. That takes time. This engorgement is what produces natural lubrication, what heightens sensitivity across the entire genital area, and what creates the physiological conditions in which orgasm becomes accessible. For most women, this process takes significantly longer than most men assume. Research suggests that many women require 15 to 20 minutes or more of non-genital arousal, kissing, touching, sensual massage, verbal intimacy, before genital stimulation feels truly pleasurable rather than merely mechanical. What does this mean in practice? It means investing genuine time and attention in the whole body before moving toward the genitals. It means kissing that is slow and present rather than pre-uncture. It means hands that explore with genuine curiosity the neck, the back, the inner arms, the thighs, without rushing toward a destination. It means whispered words and genuine expressions of desire that activate the psychological arousal that precedes and amplifies the physical. The man who spends 20 minutes building genuine whole-body arousal before any genital touch creates conditions in which genital stimulation is extraordinarily effective. The man who spends 2 minutes and proceeds directly to genital contact creates conditions in which the same stimulation feels premature and uncomfortable. The investment in arousal is not patience as sacrifice. It is the most effective technique available. Oral technique. What the research says works. Let me talk about oral stimulation, because the research on this is among the clearest and most consistent in the entire literature on female sexual satisfaction. Studies on female orgasm consistently identify oral stimulation of the clitoris as the technique most reliably associated with female orgasm, more reliably than any other single physical approach. Research published in the Journal of Sex Research found that women who received oral stimulation during their last sexual encounter were significantly more likely to have orgasmed than those who did not, a finding replicated across multiple studies and demographic groups. So, what does effective oral technique actually look like based on research and clinical documentation? It begins with patience and indirection. The most common mistake in oral technique is approaching the clitoris directly and immediately applying firm stimulation before the surrounding tissue is adequately aroused. The clitoral glands at this early stage can be overly sensitive, uncomfortably so, and direct contact too early can produce a reaction that closes rather than opens arousal. The effective approach begins with the surrounding tissue, the labia, the inner thighs, the perineum. Gentle exploratory contact that increases blood flow and sensitivity before the clitoris itself is approached. When the clitoral area is approached, the initial contact should be through the clitoral hood rather than directly on the glands, stimulating the internal shaft of the clitoris through the protective tissue above it. This produces arousal without the overstimulation that premature direct contact can cause. As arousal builds, as her breathing changes, as her body responds, as the clitoris itself becomes more engorged, the stimulation can become more direct and more focused. And here is the most important principle for the approach to orgasm: consistency. When she is approaching orgasm, the technique that is working must be maintained. The pressure, the pace, the location, the rhythm, all of it without change. The instinct to speed up or vary the approach at this moment is almost universally counterproductive. Find what works, stay with it consistently until she is fully through. Manual technique, the KI method, and blended stimulation. Let me now talk about manual technique, and specifically about two approaches that research and clinical documentation identify as significantly more effective than conventional technique. The first is the Kievan method. Conventional manual clitoral stimulation tends to apply rhythmic pressure along the vertical axis of the clitoral shaft, up and down. The KI method applies rhythmic pressure across the lateral axis, side to side, across the clitoral shaft rather than along it. Clinical reports and practitioner documentation consistently associate the KI method with dramatically reduced time to orgasm and increased orgasm intensity compared to conventional vertical stimulation. The anatomical explanation relates to the way lateral pressure distributes stimulation across a larger portion of the clitoral structure, engaging more of the internal shaft and surrounding tissue simultaneously, rather than focusing on a single line of the external glands. The technique involves positioning to allow lateral access to the clitoral area and applying consistent rhythmic pressure across the shaft, maintaining the same pace and pressure throughout as arousal builds. The same principle of consistency applies here. Find the rhythm that produces her response and maintain it without variation as she approaches orgasm. The second approach is blended stimulation. Blended stimulation refers to the simultaneous combination of internal anterior wall stimulation with external clitoral stimulation. The anterior vaginal wall, approximately 5 to 8 centimeters inside on the upper surface, is the location of the GZ zone, understood in contemporary research as the internal portion of the clitoral complex accessible through the vaginal wall. Stimulation of this area, with gentle upward curve pressure, often described as a beckoning motion with 1 or 2 fingers, while simultaneously maintaining external clitoral stimulation, produces what research documents as the most intense and most satisfying orgasmic experience for the majority of women. This blended approach works because it stimulates the clitoral complex from 2 directions simultaneously, internally through the anterior wall and externally at the glans, producing a fuller and more complete engagement of the entire structure. It requires adequate arousal before internal stimulation begins. The anterior wall is not particularly responsive until genuine engagement has occurred, and it requires real-time communication, which brings us to the next essential piece: rhythm, consistency, and the orgasm architecture. I want to spend dedicated time on this because it is in my clinical experience the single most commonly made and most consistently damaging technique error in the final approach to female orgasm. The error is change. Research on female orgasm architecture is remarkably consistent on this point. The majority of women require sustained, consistent stimulation without change in pressure, pace, or location during the final approach to orgasm. The neurological process of building toward climax is cumulative and progressive. It depends on the continued, uninterrupted delivery of the same stimulation pattern to build the neurological cascade that produces orgasm. When that stimulation pattern changes, even slightly, even with the best of intentions, the neurological build does not simply pause and resume. In many cases, it partially or completely resets. The woman who was approaching orgasm finds herself back at a lower level of arousal, having to rebuild from a point that feels frustratingly far from where she just was. And the man who changed his technique out of enthusiasm, fatigue, or the mistaken belief that variety is always better, cannot understand why the response he was receiving has shifted. This is one of the most common sources of female sexual frustration in long-term relationships. Not the absence of technique, the presence of change at the wrong moment. So, what does this principle look like in practice? It means paying close and sustained attention to her responses as stimulation progresses. It means identifying the specific approach, the pace, the pressure, the rhythm, the location that is producing escalating arousal. And it means making a deliberate, conscious decision to stay with that approach without variation once the escalation is clearly underway. Resist the instinct to change when things are working. When things are genuinely working, producing the responses that indicate she is building toward orgasm, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Continue exactly as you are, without alteration, until she is fully through. Consistency at the right moment is not monotony for the female arousal system. It is the precise condition that orgasm requires. Communication as technique. One of the most consistently documented findings in female sexual satisfaction research is also one of the most consistently avoided in practice. Real-time communication during sex is among the strongest predictors of female satisfaction. More predictive than frequency, more predictive than duration, more predictive than almost any specific physical technique. A study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that couples who communicated during sex, who asked, adjusted, and responded to feedback in real time, reported significantly higher sexual satisfaction scores than those who did not, regardless of how often they had sex, regardless of how long each encounter lasted. And yet, most couples do not communicate explicitly during sex. Research identifies the primary barrier as male, specifically, the discomfort many men feel with asking. A discomfort rooted in the cultural equation of sexual competence with instinctive knowledge. The belief that a man who needs to ask does not know what he is doing, that asking breaks the spell. This belief is not just wrong, it is actively harmful to both partners. The truth is the opposite. The most sexually skilled partners are the most communicative ones, because they understand that their partner's arousal is dynamic, variable, and personally specific. It changes with mood, with energy, with physical state, and with the emotional texture of what has happened between them that day. No amount of knowledge, including everything I am sharing in this video, is a substitute for knowing what she needs right now, tonight, in this specific moment. And the only way to know that is to ask, not awkwardly, not apologetically, but naturally, warmly, as a genuine expression of interest in her experience. Something as simple as, "Does this feel good? What feels best right now?" Or even a wordless pause that creates space for her to guide, invites her participation in her own pleasure in a way that most women find deeply, genuinely arousing. She is not a puzzle to be solved with the right sequence of moves. She's a person whose experience of pleasure is unique, specific, and available to you if you're willing to ask. Ask. If today's video gave you something real, a new understanding of her body, a reframing of what technique actually means, a renewed sense of what is possible in your intimate relationship, then please do one thing right now. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and share this video with a man who needs it. Because the information in this video, the anatomy, the research, the clinical understanding of what female satisfaction actually requires, is information that every man deserves to have and that too few ever receive. Every single week on this channel, I bring you exactly this kind of content. Honest, research-backed, clinically grounded, designed for men who take their intimate relationships seriously and who want real knowledge rather than cultural myth. Leave me a comment below and tell me which part of today's video was most new for you. Which piece of information shifts something in how you think about intimacy? I read every single comment, and your response shapes every video I create next. This channel is for you every week, without exception. I'm Dr. Julia Rhodes.